Our chalice lighting is adapted from the work of Reverend John Gibb Millspaugh. He says, all too often, we pace the geometries of our walled gardens, beautiful though they may be, believing we are traversing the whole of creation. With spirits of discovery, let us uncover the mysteries and the wonders nested in our routines, in the places where we have moved 1,000 times before. Our lives are voyages to unknowable destinations. And so along the way, let us meet, embrace, challenge, and support one another. Let us fashion a network of mutuality and extend it outward to the waiting world. In these days, we can forge lives of goodness and beauty. In these ways, we can know the life of prayer.
Hello, good morning, and welcome. Welcome to River Road Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm Reverend Amanda Weatherspoon, your Associate Minister. Welcome to all of you watching this morning on YouTube Live, those who might be watching YouTube later, or those even listening to our podcast. Welcome to this place where we gather each week. We gather in love and connection. We gather to challenge one another, to hold one another as a mirror to ourselves. We gather in this place of community, spirit, and service. We bring the fullness of who we are. We come, yet again come, in order to build this community, in order to be a part of this mission and this vision in this world. If you're new or feeling new this morning, please know that you can reach out to our connections team at connections@rruuc.org. There you can be connected to people here at River Road, find out how to get involved, find out what calls to you. As always, we gather into this space holding so many truths in our lives, in our hearts. We come and we bring it all in community together. So in that spirit, we invite you to join in on our opening hymn. Come, let us worship together.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us.
You know, of course, that there are so many ways to connect with our community as we emerge anew into this time. Many of those things are happening across the whole span of the summertime season here at River Road. I hope you will mark your calendars for our outdoor in-person worship services coming up in July and August, along with our all-congregation retreat. Details are coming in your e-weekly and separately on email, so open those emails when you get them, register when you can, or if you want to get more information, email us at office@ruuc.org and we'll get you everything you need to know about what's coming up. We'll also gather today on the plaza in front of our building for our beloved annual celebration of Flower Communion with Reverend Amanda and Cliff from 12 to 12:45. Bring lawn chairs and sunscreen maybe, and of course, bring your beautiful blossoms to build a bouquet together. On the 19th, we'll be sharing an all-congregation drumming circle, an intergenerational event right here on the River Road grounds. You'll get more information shortly. You can sign up on our website. We hope you'll join us. It will be a beautiful, ebullient day for all ages. Pals on the Playground is happening for families and kids. You can take advantage of these simple, low-key, non-stressful ways for kids and families to connect as we keep making our way forward toward full-scale Sunday programming in the fall. And in the coming weeks, we have some really beautiful and sacred shared worship experiences. Across the nation and across the region, we'll be gathering together. You can join us next week for Meadville Lombard in the pulpit, when I'll be preaching alongside a team from my own alma mater, the school that our former senior minister Bill Murray went to serve at. We'll be working together with theological schools and religious professionals across the country to shape a commitment to what it takes to build ministers for the generations to come. On the 27th, we'll also share the very best that UU Worship has to offer. Congregations around the country will join in this year's all UU Sunday morning service from our General Assembly, and the following Sunday, we will gather with All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., as they reflect on the power of our own work in collective history, the ways it overlaps, inspires, and intersects with theirs. And this month, of course, we honor pride. We lift up the history, the legacy, the joy, and the struggle of what it takes to be and to become a community where everybody's love and everybody's life is important.
Hello, this is Reverend Amanda, and for today's Time for All Ages, we'll be exploring the history of Pride. Pride Day, or what used to be called Gay and Lesbian Pride, has taken many shapes over the years. These days, for some of us, it's hard to remember a time in which people in the LGBTQIA+ community were unable to freely love who they love and live the lives most authentic to them. But sadly, for many more, these days don't feel so long ago. There are many ways to refer to the LGBTQIA+ community, and we're always learning so much more. But for this video today, I'll be referring to this community as the queer community, or as queer people. Although queer people have always existed all around the world, our society, and other societies too, only recognize heterosexual relationships as legal and appropriate, and heterosexual people as worthy of resources and support. Queer people were often met with violence and anger, hostility and rage. Many queer people chose to hide their sexuality so that they wouldn't be targets of this kind of injustice. And most people who are out, meaning that their communities knew about their sexuality, face discrimination of all types, meaning that they would have a hard time finding employment, a place to live, or any kind of safety. But regardless of the dangerous risks of being out during this time, there were people who fought this system of injustice and demanded to be treated with respect and equality. The 1960s was a decade of massive social change. People were rising up against systems of injustice and oppression and demanding to be treated equally. This was a period of great disruption all around us, disruption of our systems and our laws, and without this period, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. At that time, there were many laws set in place that made the lives and actions of queer people illegal. Queer people were often not allowed to gather in large groups at restaurants or at bars, and often they were harassed and brutalized by law enforcement if they did so. It was quite common during this period for their gathering places to be raided by law enforcement, which often led to violence and brutality and arrest, which of course only made their lives more difficult. During one of these raids on June 28, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village, which is in New York City, the patrons of this inn in which people were gathered, and also other residents in Greenwich Village, decided that they had had enough. As officers attempted to round people up and check their IDs, people began resisting. There are lots of first-hand accounts of what happened that night and what happened over the next several weeks. Perhaps one of the most notable is the story of Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman who was a staple in this community. She's often credited as having thrown the first brick, but what we know for sure was that she was a leading force in the Stonewall uprisings. The Stonewall Inn mostly attracted queer people of color, especially trans people and drag queens. Trans people are often the targets of the harshest and most violent treatment within the queer community, especially trans people of color, so having a place to gather in community has always been crucial for survival. And in the midst of such great social change happening all over the country, on this night in 1969, that spirit of uprising flooded the streets of Greenwich Village. The uprising ended up lasting for several weeks, according to some accounts. But that isn't where our story ends. In fact, that's just the beginning. This period of uprising, this period of demanding rights, being tired of being targets, being tired of being brutalized and rounded up and restricted from living their lives, this is a period that was crucial for the queer community, which so many of us are a part. The Stonewall Uprising strengthened and created many gay and trans advocacy groups of that time that went on to become larger organizations and also led to Pride. Pride every year is held near the end of June to commemorate this very uprising. And Pride has transformed over the years. Each year it grows in popularity, and now it's even somewhat mainstream. It hasn't always been, though. In the 1980s, during the beginning of the AIDS crisis, Pride was often almost like a collective funeral. Some years, Pride has been a celebration of new legal rights, such as the Supreme Court's decision for marriage equality in 2015. Some years, Pride is just a time for people to get together, but each year, Pride exists still. We've come a long way since Stonewall, but there's still so much more work to do. Although love is the law of the land in terms of marriage equality, there's still so many groups in the queer community that are fighting for their rights. There are also so many within our community that hold other unprotected identities. There are homeless queer youth who have been turned away from their homes. There are Black and brown trans and non-binary people who experience suicide at higher rates. There are disabled queer people who are fighting for their benefits. Their partnerships aren't recognized. Yes, we have won some battles, but we still have a long, long way to go. But each year, Pride anchors us. It anchors us to the promise and the truth that we are still here, that we deserve humanity and protection and rights and, yes, equality, and that we will keep fighting until we are all free to love who we love and live our most authentic and fabulous lives.
This is a day when we ground ourselves in history and in legacy, in what that history makes of us, and how it enables us to shape the future. We gather together in this place at a time upon which history swings, a time of new beginnings, of hope, of joy and sorrow and struggle. Indeed, what a blessing it is to be each other's people as we dwell on the hinge of history. There is so much happening in our lives and in our world. Let us begin today a time of joys and sorrows by lifting up the reliable, beautiful rhythm of every year, our utter joy in this time for graduates of every stripe. From those who marched in perfect formation along the rain-streaked fields at Walt Whitman High School yesterday, to the elementary school kids who somehow made it through this remarkable year, bounding toward the first days of summer even as we speak. And for the teachers who put in the time, then the other time, and then some more time, and some time after that, all suffused with the Spirit, we are grateful. We hold today the losses we have suffered and have feared, family members, struggles faced. Please, as always, check the e-weekly for opportunities, open the email, take the call when our pastoral care team reaches out for ways you might be able and willing to provide meals and rides and support for all those folks facing transitions and medical needs right now. We gather always in the context of our actual, real lives, not curated versions of those lives that folks might hide behind, but the real ones. We gather in a place dedicated to authenticity, to tangible commitment. And today we take the important, necessary, vital, and humbling step of sharing with each other the results of deep historical research into the land upon which this sacred space is built. This land, we now know, is a part of a colony here in Maryland whose history of enslavement goes back to 1630. Very specifically, this ground right here was owned by a man who held at least a dozen people in the bonds of slavery year after year after year, feeding the machine of injustice and oppression. This land and this story, which you'll hear so much more about in just a few minutes, and indeed the years to come, as we continue to explore our commitments and our legacy. This land is sacred inasmuch as we are able and willing to make it so, including by the work we can and must do as we shape our own chapter of this shared history. It is joy and sorrow, burden and blessing, love and struggle. It is our work to do, and we hold it with courage together, today and in all the days to come.
I now invite you into a space of meditation, of contemplation, of rootedness and of stillness, perhaps relaxing into where you are, closing your eyes, lowering your gaze, rooting in this moment. This is a time of blessing and of challenge. This is a time where we get to reflect back on this year that we've had together, of continuing our legacy, of growing into our values, of walking the walk and talking the talk. Around this time a year ago, this country was on fire. We were fed up with the injustice that we were seeing year after year, time after time. We were fed up from the lack of accountability of those who are supposed to serve and protect. We were tired of watching the blood and the violence. We were tired of not feeling safe in our communities. And here at River Road, we chose to live into our values, and we came together as a community. We worked hard to pass our racial justice resolution, as an entire community, not as one group or as one cause, but we said, this is something that belongs to all of us. And we sat out and we did the work that we're still doing to this day. Much like the focus on our racial justice resolution, we decided these cannot just be words. These cannot just be words that we pass, words that we say, words to feel better about ourselves, but we challenged one another to do the work. And we have done the work. We have done the hard work of examining our values and our practices. We've done the hard work of figuring out where we lack, where we need to grow, what our growing edges are. And it's work that we still have to do. We are nowhere near finished. And that is a blessing that we get to continue. That work led us to where we are right now in passing our 8th principle here in this congregation. And the work of living into that, the blessing of the cycle, the blessing of the journey, the blessing of the challenge. And we are challenged once more. Understanding the history of this land that we build on, the history of this land in which we gather, whether in body or in spirit, the history of this land that became our history. What we do with that now, we build on from all that we have done, even prior to last year, prior to 5 years ago, prior to 10 years ago. We build on this history. We are nowhere near finished, and none of us knows where this journey goes. But we know that we back up our values. We live into the promise that we make to each other and the promise that we make to this community. Because that's the kind of people that we are. That's the kind of people that we have become for each other. So we look to each other and we bless one another in this work. We don't wait for the abstract to just keep happening. We put it into motion. We don't look to an external source to fix and solve. We roll up our sleeves. We rest in that faith that we are able to do hard things together. We are able to face the reality. We've done it before. And that's the blessing of being in community together. So we hold to that this morning. We hold to that throughout this year, not knowing where we will end up this time next year and how we will be blessing one another and this community and this year to come. How joyful it is to be with you all. As we gather today, may we hold that knowledge, that knowing in our hearts. May we prepare ourselves to do the work of love, the work of care, the work of justice. May we hold to one another and our values. May we do this in love. May it always be so. Blessed be. This is a community of generosity and a community of giving. And each month here at River Road, we extend our offering to a community organization whose values align with ours. For this month of June, that organization is Safe Streets. Many of us know Safe Streets pretty well at this point. This is a community partnership that is near and dear to our hearts. This is a community partnership in which our values shine through. We know that gun violence is one of the most major and violent, plaguing issues in our community, in our lifetimes. This is something that affects every aspect of our lives. This is something that makes our world a little less possible for us to thrive and to live, and it is not an abstraction, and we are not separate from it. Partnering with Safe Streets allows us to let people in impacted communities lead the way in terms of the best ways to serve their community and to address this issue of gun violence in this type of a way. Many of us here at River Road have done events and different things of that nature with Safe Streets. I know prior to the pandemic, I attended the block party, and this was such a beautiful time of community and joy and love and gathering. And it's a testament to the human spirit that even in the midst of uncertainty, even in the midst of injustice and violence and lack of resources, that we are still able to gather together in such a joyful way. That is the work of Safe Streets Baltimore. The pandemic has, of course, been hard on all of these communities. It's been hard on the communities who are most impacted by the intersectional realities of economic inequality, a lack of access to resources. Safe Streets Baltimore provides a lot of resources, including emotional support to the community in which it serves. This is a very crucial time for giving in this community. This is a very crucial time to help continue their work in the world. Here in a moment, we'll hear from Alex Long, who is one of the primary stakeholders in Safe Streets Baltimore. He does so much work with this community to help keep it going and to help provide safety and support for the people who receive the support from this organization. Now we'll roll the video and you'll hear more from Alex himself. You'll also see images of Safe Streets at work.
Safe Streets Baltimore is a violence prevention group that look at it as if it's a disease. Not only do we tackle gun violence, but we also try to provide a full circle type of atmosphere in the work that we do. Many of our outreach workers find themselves time to time almost being therapists, really sitting down not only with the community members, but a lot of their family members that extend outside of our range from a whole host of different problems and situations. Right now, we find ourselves in a pandemic. And even though things are hard, Safe Street Baltimore still find themselves on the front line, fighting a good job, feeding families, mentoring, monitoring kids, providing all the necessities that community need to stay safe. Safe Streets is essential and vital in the future of our city, not only for the inner city, but the whole city. For our youth wants to live, and through the work that we do at Safe Streets, we ensure that without question, our kids have a bright future. I appreciate everyone's opportunity for sitting down, taking a moment out their day, just listening and understanding the day in, day out struggles that we face. Once again, a lot of our employees find themselves in the middle of disputes with gun violence, where there's weapons on the scenes, where there's weapons in the mediations, and yet we're still able to keep cool heads so everyone can prevail and go home to their families. And these are the things that's essential to ensuring the future of our youth. Once again, teaching them the conflict mediation skills necessary to ensure that they can make it home to their families. This is Alex Long from Safe Streets, Baltimore, and I thank you.
Talk about community building. That is what we are talking about. They are who we learn from, the way that they are able to build community where they are at. And our job is to support that happening, to support the leadership of impacted communities as we move into this season and into this period of time in our congregational life in which we are examining and exploring what does it mean to repair. We know that it starts with on-the-ground work. It is not an abstraction, and it is something practical we can do right now in supporting Safe Streets Baltimore. There are many ways to give to this cause, to our extending offering this morning. Of course, please do go online to our social justice giving page. There you can find more information about Safe Streets Baltimore. You need only scroll down to the month of June and click on the link, and there you can get more information about this organization, and you can even give directly there. Of course, you can give through our text to give. That number is 73256. That's 73256. It's in your screen right now. Please be sure to add Safe Streets as the receiving organization and the amount that you would like to give. If you'd want to get involved with events with Safe Streets Baltimore or other programming in Prevent Gun Violence Ministry, you can always contact this social justice team directly. Each social justice team has an email list, an email address that is posted onto our website. You can contact pvgm@rruuc.org to connect with members of that team if you'd like to get directly involved with the work that they do. You can also contact David Ward, who's a member of our congregation and who does a lot of work within this community. However you decide to give, please know that we build together, that we take our values and we put them into motion. We give life the shape of justice with the work that we do. We are so thankful and grateful to Safe Streets Baltimore for allowing us to partner with them, allowing us to follow their lead, and allowing us to impact real and lasting change right here where we're at. Please give as you're willing and able.
Viola Fletcher was 7 years old when the sky started burning. Her mother hustled her into a room with a bag, and she told her to pack now, not later. It was 100 years ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Viola still remembers. In her own words, spoken this month at 107 years old, she says, "I remember the noise of the guns shooting, people running and screaming, noise from the air, fires burning and smelling smoke. We could hear someone going through the neighborhood saying that everybody should leave town, that they were killing all the black people." And so young Viola, at 7 years old, she did as she was told. She listened to her mother, and they fled. While 35 blocks of Tulsa, Black Wall Street, the hub of middle-class African-American business, burned to the ground behind them. And yet, over the course of the 80 or so years that followed, while Viola Fletcher struggled to sleep through the night, every night, afraid that they might come for her again, while she made ends meet and persisted in spite of all the obstacles stacked against her, including the complete obliteration of the entire financial infrastructure of middle-class blackness in America, while all that happened, a curious thing happened to history. You see, the history that she had lived, the history Viola is still living, it receded into the background of the narrative all around her. Over all the span of those 80 years, the narratives of her city and of her nation's memory. The massacre in Tulsa became a riot, became a footnote, became a rumor, all the while remaining so vivid in the minds and the souls of those who lived it that it impacted every single thing. You see, that's the thing about history. So often the people who didn't die and weren't displaced and aren't still struggling to get by are the ones who tell the story. And the narrative thrust of that story, we know, it almost always moves us steadily toward the absolution of the ones who did the dispossessing in the first place. But right now, 100 years later, Viola Fletcher, her 100-year-old brother, Hughes Van Ellis, and many others in Tulsa, they are telling their story again. They, along with other survivors of the massacre 100 years ago, have filed a lawsuit against the city they were born in, seeking the creation of a victims fund to support and sustain educational opportunities for those who rebuilt a life after very nearly everything was taken from them. Viola Fletcher and her little brother and all the others, they bonded together in pain. And today they are demanding not just some endless, grinding repetition of their sufferings, but instead a chance to lift up the generations who are rising from the ashes that they escaped so long ago. An education fund, school support, a single foot in the door on home equity that builds wealth over time, a chance for young black leaders in Tulsa whose families were systematically shut out from wealth and power to settle into the rhythms of a life where the future is less broken because they shape it, where the past is more honest because all the people together aren't afraid to tell it true. History, Viola Fletcher said this month, never sleeps. And it never goes away. So it is for all of us, not just in that place, but in this one. In all the places where stories of opportunity and oppression, searing injustice, and enormous courage overlap. And so the work of history, first and foremost, is to keep telling it until the narrative changes, to not rest until we can together own the fullness of a story that is ours to contend with, to be accountable for, and to carve opportunity from. Owning a collective past means moving forward to the future on a different, more authentic set of terms. It means spending all of our collective energy as cities, as communities, as a congregation, as a nation. It means spending all of our energy building something instead of hiding from something. It means claiming truth and creating opportunity, and truth is not something to be afraid of. Not even when we're ashamed of it. Instead, truth is a chance to build a new way forward with a firmer foundation than the lies and obfuscations could ever be. Now, as you know, here we are in this place, so astonishingly lucky to have made our congregational home here amidst this beauty, along what was commonly called the River Road in Bethesda. Running roughly parallel to the C&O Canal and the Potomac River, the River Road of ours. It was a hub for market forces long before the Civil War. It still is, so long after it. The C&O Canal, which so many of us walk along and ride along and jog along, the C&O Canal, once called the Grand Old Ditch, carried more coal in one day than any other waterway in the Northeast managed in an entire year. And it ran right through here, this part of Montgomery County, intersecting a patchwork of large plantations throughout this state where enslaved persons were held in bondage in Montgomery County since the middle of the 17th century. The canal, the river, the road, the plantations. All of it served to feed the machine of those market forces that enriched the slave-holding landowners of this region enough to make them builders and sustainers of our nation's capital itself. As you know by now, our extensive historical research, helmed in ways I will always be grateful for by Joe Salunas and supported by Joan Zenzen. Our historical research shows that this land upon which I stand now, this place upon which this pulpit I try to say true things in is planted, this land was held by one of those large slave-holding landowners, Mr. Allison Naylor, for whom a branch of the Little Falls watershed running right behind this building was once named. This land, which is rocky and hilly and probably difficult to farm, it very likely served as a place to grow hay and to pasture horses in service to Mr. Naylor's significant business holdings in the district. People most likely didn't live here. They worked here and worked here and worked here some more. Enslaved people worked here, tending the land, tending the silage, tending the horses, all in bondage to a man who was not only a slaveholder, but in fact, one of the more notorious, entitled, and corrupt slave dealers in the history of the District of Columbia. There are so many stories of this man and of his dealings, from the way he treated his own family to the utter corruption of his business practices. Even just a cursory read paints a picture of a morally bankrupt human being, and yet the story that we have to tell, it is not just his story either. It is a story of the people he enslaved, those who endured and survived, and those who did not, and those who carved courage and conviction even out of the midst of his oppression. Thus, the story of this place isn't just white people's history. It is also the story of Hannah Stewart, a freed woman held illegally by Mr. Naylor, who knew her rights and petitioned the D.C. Circuit Court for her rightful freedom. Naylor would not allow her to speak in her own defense. So the trial ended, predictably, as so many before it and after it, in a hung jury. She was not freed, and we do not know what happened to her. But we do know Hannah Stewart's story. Because however much that man endeavored to silence her, he could not erase a legal record that bears witness to her courage even today. The history of this place is also the history of Mr. Lewis Ferguson, held illegally by Allison Naylor in the district, even after all slaves were emancipated in the District of Columbia in April of 1862. Naylor held him still, and Ferguson managed to weave his way through the streets of the city, effecting his escape and enlisting that same day in the U.S. Colored Infantry, where he served his nation in the 1st Regiment until the end of the war, when he came right back to this region and made his home back here as a fully free man, because this region was the only place that he had ever known. And this place was his place too. So it is that when we acknowledge this land upon which we gather, we begin with the Anacostan native people indigenous to this place, who built settlements along the river before being driven away by settlers and their canal works and their pastures. We honor the thriving Black community that sprung up along this very roadway of ours, the River Road, in the years immediately before and after the Civil War, on the edges of the plantation holdings, where slave cabins eventually gave way to small houses for formerly enslaved people, who in turn made a way for each other, creating a social safety net when society at large all but ignored them. It happened in Tobytown, just up on the Potomac. It happened in the Scotland community, not so far from here. And it happened literally in this place, along River Road. One of the most thriving post-war Black communities in the entire DC region was right here, along the River Road, where Whole Foods and the McDonald's and the hubbub of every day now stand. Right there, near the radio tower that dominates the skyline, near an apartment building I almost lived in, was the River Road Colored School. And the place where a man history remembers only as the blind old preacher of River Road gathered his flock of free people for outdoor worship every single Sunday when the weather was good enough, not a half mile from right here. The blind old preacher of River Road strode out into this same sunlight on a Sunday morning, just like this one, in a perfectly starched white shirt, resplendent with the word, to preach to the people a few things about hope. Right there, behind the McDonald's I take my kids to before choir practice, was the cemetery that was built and developed by Black benevolent associations for a community that knew how to take care of itself. A cemetery desecrated again and again and again by the wheels of so-called progress. It was right here, along the River Road, on a grassy loading zone just off the street, that the River Road Lions Negro League baseball team had their tattered and beloved diamond in the 1920s and early 30s, the pride of little boys who are now old men, who have not forgotten what it was to dream of the big leagues before Jackie Robinson ever swung a bat. Old men whose families were finally driven from this land for dimes on the dollar in the middle of this century, when the land became valuable and the subdivisions started. Right about the time when a fledgling congregation bought a hilly plot of land with a stream behind it, roped off the perimeter of that sacred space we now stand in, and debated fretfully whether to call themselves the Little Falls Unitarian Church, or ultimately River Road, us. A little congregation bursting at the seams with children and families, and promise, and deeply held values, and a song deep in their souls. A little congregation who bought this land just as the last of the Black-owned businesses in the region faded away in the endless grind of commerce. A little congregation who bought this land when it was only 10 years removed from the ownership of the direct and immediate descendants of that slaveholder and dealer Allison Naylor himself. Only 10 years separated the ownership of that man's children, who benefited from his complicity in the greatest sin ever perpetuated in American history. Only 10 years separated their ownership from ours. Which means when we remember those who were on this land before, we would be lying if we did not also remember them, the ones who turned this sacred place into yet another mechanism to support oppression. They were here too. Not just with Allison Naylor and his descendants, but with all of those who turn this place into a vehicle of intergenerational wealth for only some while systemically pillaging the opportunity of others. And now we know, and we cannot unknow, that the opportunity our congregation benefits from now is wrapped up in that grand and horrible and beautiful and courageous and heartbreaking history. We know not only what was perpetuated here, but what was rebuilt here after the Civil War by the Black community along the River Road, and we know too what was lost. Not in the ancient recesses of some far past history, not just in memories of suffering, but in the thriving, living, pulsing heart of a community that in fact fought their way back only to be wiped clear by progress that made no place for them. And we know that the word reparations is an awfully big and meaningful word. But we also know, if we let ourselves sit with it, that the whole thing is grounded in the word repair. Repair for what is broken. Repair for what could be. Repair for what we can only build from firmer foundations than the flimsy stuff of lies. As the Hebrew theologians across the ages would teach us, the work of our souls is to repair the world. Tikkun olam, and the repair cannot happen unless we first acknowledge what has been broken and shattered in the first place. Right now, in this pivotal time in history, we acknowledge the brokenness, the full, complex, evolving story of that brokenness and the stake it has on our actions and in our hearts. By owning this history, which is a history we all share together across diversity, across difference, across story, across background, by owning this history together so full of suffering and courage, we also commit ourselves to living within the context of its great challenge. After all, Viola Davis said the first work of history is to keep telling it. We say the second work of history is to be changed by it. And so when we catch our breaths here in this summer season, the work begins anew. I do not know what shape it will take, but I know we cannot put down this narrative once we finally really read it in full. We need to do this together. We need you. A team of lay leaders has to come together to discern what it means not only to commemorate, but to repair, all in relationship to the remarkable outpouring of dedication witnessed in this place over the last year. From the racial justice resolution we passed a year ago to passing the 8th principle last week, our commitments, I suspect, will take time. Because repair is not the work of a moment. It will take talent. We must lift up what we have for the good of the whole, and yes, it will take treasure. We're already working to align funding possibilities with what it will take to live into the commitments of this journey. It will not be easy work. That which is worthy of our time, our talent, and our treasure never is, but I can think of nothing more authentically aligned with our mission and our values than this. I, for one, am deeply honored by the chance to be a part of a team that will carry this story forward. There is one thing that history cannot tell us, and that is what those who came before us felt when they were on this land. I do not know who loved this land or who hated it, who walked beside that stream and heard the rush of horses instead of tractor trailers on River Road beyond, and felt refreshed by the sun-dappled mornings in that place that refreshes my soul even now. I do not know who looked up at the great tall trees and felt small in comparison to mighty things, or who marked the trails of the deer whose ancestors still come here to rest. I don't know who loved this place before, or who hated it, or who felt both emotions rising in themselves at once. I do know that we love it today. We love this place so deeply. We are grateful for it. We are so connected to it. And that's why Joe Solunas decided to begin this research and to dedicate so much of his commitment to the land upon which we gather, because he loves it. Love, really, is the impetus. We love it enough to tell a real story about it, to learn about it, to lament what it became a part of, and to move forward willing to change and be changed by that history. So we tell the story, starting now. And we let the story change us, starting now. And we write our chapter for the ones who will be here long after we are gone. This little congregation on the river road with deep values and big hearts, who are not afraid to say true things out loud. Amen. There's so much to be grateful for. So many people, so much work, so much hope, and so much labor. Today, I want to lift up gratitude to the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, whose historical research helped ground us in the River Road African American community that thrived here for so long. I want to lift up, of course, Joe Salunas and Joan Zenzen, who have blessed us with the fullness of our legacy. Reverend Amanda, who talked me through the entire flow of this service in about a minute and a half when I did not know where to start, and every single one of us who takes our piece of the work to carry it forward. To Shwai and Shwai's beautiful music. Of course, to Linda Ryden, to our choir, to Mandy Kelly working the Zoom room at home, and to Dave and Marsha Leonard making the magic happen as they always do. To Khaki Power, who will be here organizing flowers for our flower communion in the span of just 1 hour. To this community and to your hearts, we lift up gratitude. And now, may the truth that makes us free, the love that casts out fear, and the hope that never dies, guide us and those we love and those we do not love forward together till the day spring breaks and the shadows flee away. Amen.